Welcome to Conversations Different, a podcast from the Santa Fe New Mexican about the people and places of northern New Mexico. This is Inez Russell Gomez, and this week we're talking to CASA First, an organization dedicated to helping children and families. With us are Grace Corthus, CASA First Program Support Specialist, Annie Raskin, CASA First Executive Director, and Veronica Krupnik, CASA First Board Vice President, and a youth and tribal advocate and leader in child welfare, both in New Mexico and across the country. Welcome, everyone. So, Annie, let's start with your explanation of what you do and how it works.
Sure. Thank you, Inez, and thank you for inviting us. We love talking about how everyone in the community can help children and families. And CASA First has really gone through kind of a renovation and rebirth in the last year. We're really expanding what we do and not just matching volunteers with kids in foster care, but any child or family who could really use someone to help them. So we work with kids who may be unhoused or families who are having a lot of transition or challenges, or kids who used to be in foster care. And we match them with a caring community member, all sorts of different people within the community who are matched with these families and really support them how they best need. It can be really practical supports, like we work with a lot of grandparents raising grandchildren and give them cribs and formulas, or do activities with them. Or, as you mentioned, Inez, sometimes it can be pretty weighty work with kids while they're in child welfare. We make reports to the judge. We make sure that child is safe and they have everything they need to thrive.
Okay, so it's not necessarily in a court situation right now, but is the CASA volunteer always appointed by a judge, or can people approach you directly and say, hey, I need some help?
Absolutely. So we do have about half the kids we work with are in child welfare, and their CASAs, the court-appointed special advocates, are appointed by a judge. But our Abrigo Advocates program is volunteers who are also highly trained, but they're not appointed by a judge. And we get families calling us, a lot of partners call us and say, hey, this kid or family needs an extra helping hand. Or we have some kids we work with who don't have family and need that support. So, okay. Yes.
Okay, so there's lots of ways to help children is what I'm hearing.
100%. Yeah.
Grace, what does a support specialist do?
So a big part of my role is outreach, which right now depends largely on volunteer recruitment. So at this point in time, we have a training class coming up in October. The deadline to sign up is mid-September. And we're just really trying to make sure that people know that kids in our community need support. Kids, teens, young adults, and even infants, families really need our care at this time. And so we are really just trying to make sure that people know they can become volunteers regardless of their own experience with child welfare or social work. We just want compassionate, dedicated individuals who care about these kids.
Do you have an estimate of, let's say, how many hours a week? If you're a CASA volunteer, do you need to do, 2 hours a week, 10 hours a week, or does it just depend?
Yeah, it's really a case-by-case basis, I would say. So we take into account what each volunteer's capacity is, and our volunteer supervisors, Michelle and Sarah, are really wonderful about making sure that they match people appropriately so that people aren't being stretched beyond their capacity. So sometimes it'll mean that a volunteer sees the child or youth that they work with once a week. Sometimes it'll be once every 2 weeks. Sometimes with Abrigo Advocates, it's even closer to once a month, just depending on the needs of that particular child or youth.
Okay, so it, as everything, it depends on the situation. Now, Veronica, you have a special understanding of the child welfare system, I would say, from the outside and maybe from the inside. Can you talk about what leads you to do this volunteer work? Because you're a busy young woman. You have a lot going on.
Yes, absolutely. So my origin story with CASA First actually started way before I ever knew they were an org. I was in the Albuquerque foster care system for about 4 years, and during that time period, I actually had a CASA myself, a different branch, but same, mother tree organization. And that individual left enough of a positive impact on me because of how consistent they were. As a child in foster care, I went through 7 different homes, a lot of changes in social workers, teachers, therapists, judges, you name it. But that CASA was that one person that stayed with me consistently through the duration of my case, and was really foundational in advocating for me. And so as a young adult, I found my way to a CASA program, and it kind of became that full circle moment because I wanted to have the same impact on other children's lives. So I always say that my CASA had a really huge ripple effect because they didn't just help one kid. By extension, they helped many. And now I've taken my advocacy work from CASA, and I've really grown that on the state and national level. And like I said, that ripple effect literally went across the country. So that's really cool to think about it like that.
That is important, and I think it underscores the difference that we can make in each other's lives. Like they always say, a caring adult. And sometimes the child just needs someone to talk to, or in some cases to go to the court and say, here's the best interests of this kid. How many volunteers, Grace, do you guys have, and what do you need?
Yeah, so right now we have about 65, and that number just fluctuates depending on how many children are in the system. And every time we get a new training class, we get more volunteers, which is really exciting. And so right now we need as many as we can get, I would say. Especially with the expansion of our Abrigo program, we're having more and more clients, and we are seeing more child welfare cases as well. So as many volunteers as we can get, we will always have children for them. So.
Right. This is one organization that would like to work itself out of a job, in a sense. And on that note, we'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with Conversations Different.
Thanks, Inez. This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. We hope you're enjoying this episode of Conversations Different with Inez Russell Gomez. Great local content is only possible with a talented staff dedicated to bringing you the best local content possible. For that staff to do its work, we need your support by subscribing to the Santa Fe New Mexican. If you're already a subscriber, thank you. And if not, there's never been a better time to subscribe. In addition to our home-delivered newspaper that comes with full digital access, we also provide digital-only subscriptions for SantaFeNewMexican.com. We'll also be releasing more online-only audio and video programming moving forward. The Santa Fe New Mexican has been here for nearly 175 years, and we want to continue being your source for local news and information. Visit us at SantaFeNewMexican.com/subscribe or call us at 505-986-3010. Thank you.
It's a new day in New Mexico, and the doors to boundless opportunity are open as tens of thousands of New Mexicans reach higher to pursue a dream, broaden their horizons, and retrain for a better job. With the New Mexico Lottery and Opportunity Scholarships, you could build yourself a better future anywhere in the state. You put in the hard work, we'll help with the costs. For eligibility details, visit reachhighernm.com.
We are back with Conversations Different, discussing CASA First, an advocacy group for children. Annie, how did you come to work with this organization?
Boy, I've been in public service in our community for a long time. I've been here about 40 years and was a firefighter paramedic with the city of Santa Fe, and saw things when things did not work out, and I wanted to be more proactive. So I got into social work, and for the last 20 years have really exclusively worked with kids and families impacted by trauma and severe trauma, and a lot birth to 3. So I ran some behavioral health programs, started some programs, saw a lot of success with families when they had the right supports. And when the executive director position opened up at CASA First, I had given trainings for them, had teamed with them on cases, and just love that model of a caring human being, a caring community member. It's what creates community. If we're all involved and working it together and support each other, we can all thrive. So for me, it's the best thing I can do.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, one of the not issues, but one of the realities of New Mexico is that this is a state for centuries that has undergone trauma. We have generational trauma, in our indigenous and Hispanic communities. We have immediate trauma right now in families, because of poverty and violence and drugs. And at some point, it feels like nothing we do is ever enough. And you have that individual success, but then you go look at the rankings and we're still, doing terribly by children if you are looking at a big picture. How do you bring fresh hope every day to your job?
Sure. Well, first of all, Inez, I think none of us are immune from having trauma or struggles in our family. And I think part of it's the human condition.
Yes.
So I think starting from that perspective, but I see so many people open up their hearts and children and families thrive. I do have hope. And I know, though, we're a moment right now where our child welfare system is struggling, I see a lot of successes. I think we have a lot of talents here. And I think we're thinking differently. I think we're being innovative, like us starting Abrigo and working more in prevention. So I see a lot of positivity as well. And when we spend time with kids and families, too, we see a lot of joy.
Yeah.
So it's very affirming in that way.
And that's huge. And Grace, weigh in, because this is, what you do is you support. My thing is that when we talk about children, I'm always having to write stories about, we lead in hunger. We just have all these conditions where they're not thriving. So how do you stay positive? Because so many social workers and people who do this kind of work are burning out.
Yeah, I think that what is immensely rewarding to me are the chances when I see kids who have not had the opportunity to really be children being given that opportunity. And I think that our Abrigo program and our CASA program and our Youth Ambassador program, I think all three of those do a really great job of allowing kids to be kids. And I think that people don't realize what a vital right that is, that it's not a privilege. It's something that every child needs and deserves, and not something that every child is given. So I think it gives me a lot of hope when we host events and kids are running around and laughing and having fun, when I know that these are children who have been through far more than any child should have to go through. And so it's really inspiring to see them play.
Play is the best. Talk about the Abrigo program and what that stands for and what it does.
Yeah, so Abrigo Advocates, we formed this initially with feedback from community partners and those with lived experience, based on seeing a need from children and youth falling through the cracks in the existing systems. So, one crucial point about our Abrigo Advocates program is, unlike the court-appointed special advocates program, it extends past age 18. So there's no firm age cutoff. We'll work with clients who are, 22, 23 years old, as well as families holistically. And part of that is because there really is just a shortage of resources for people between the ages of 18 and 23. And so we wanted to fill that gap, as well as expanding care for youth who age out of the foster care system and still need support. And so that was part of the reason for Abrigo Advocates. And then we also just see a lot of children and youth in our community in general who maybe, do have people in their lives that are there for them, but need a little bit of extra help. And we want to be that for them.
And we can all use help. And Veronica, what did it mean for you growing up? When you talked about it a little bit in our earlier conversation about that one person that was consistent. That seems like that made a huge difference for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that having that consistent person meant that I didn't have to always re-explain myself and re-explain my story. And it also meant that there was someone on my team that was advocating from a bigger picture of my entire time in care, what brought me into care, what the end goal was. And you can't really get that until you're, in it with that child. So I think that it's hugely important to have that advocate. And one of the things that I really admire about the steps that CASA First is taking is that they're really trying to make sure that young people, children, families, that they have that extra support without the barriers that we see consistently in child welfare, right? Most of the time, to get an advocate, you have to be involved in a system. This program is taking that away and saying, if you want help, we're going to help you. And we don't see
important.
that as often as we should.
Yeah. Because, I mean, I know the way I was brought up, you don't go to authorities for help. You know, you don't call the police if there's a problem at home. You never talk to a social worker. And you might need lots of help, but those are not your friends necessarily. It's someone that might invade your family and cause harm, which is probably not the right way to look at it. But, you know, I know being taught we don't talk to strangers. Mm-hmm. So this way you can go to people who aren't going to judge you and who can help you without necessarily putting you in a system.
Yes, absolutely. You know, abrigo comes down to the definition is to shelter from harm, right? And that can look a lot of different ways, but when you need help, the last thing you really want to do is go sit in an office by yourself, re-explain your story over and over again, I had to. And so having that extra hand there, that extra person there, means you're not in it like by yourself. And I think that that's huge. And also that we're not gonna like make you prove to us how needy or how how much help you need. Like, this is just, you show up, we'll show up and meet you where you are. And I think that's something I'd love to see in the greater child welfare conversation.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And on that note, we'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with Conversations Different.
My name is Maria Jose Rodriguez Cadiz, and I am the Executive Director with Solace Sexual Assault Services. Our mission is to prevent sexual violence and empower survivors of sexual violence through restoring dignity, strength, and resiliency. For almost 51 years, Solace has reduced the impact of sexual violence. We do it by focusing on human rights, social justice, hope, and dignity. We believe survivors are experts in their own experiences and acknowledge that empowering them is crucial to their healing. Our advocacy, forensic interviewing, and therapy services are centered to their needs. Our sexual violence prevention programs in schools and community is just as important. Please check our website at findsolace.org. And if in need, you can call our 24/7 hotline, which is 800-721-7273. Your support is crucial to the lives of survivors. Thank you. Gracias.
We are back with CASA First, discussing how their program is innovating so it helps more children and families where they need to be helped. Talk about what young people can do, because you were mentioning in the break that not just adults can help. Annie?
Okay, thank you, Liz. Well, we love volunteerism, and we saw the impact it was having with adults in our community. They were feeling more connected in the community and with each other and gratified. And a lot of them have told us it's the best thing they've ever done. It can often be the hardest thing, but the most gratifying. So we wanted to expand that to children in our community. And this is a program that's completely blossomed. It's called Youth Ambassadors. We have volunteers from age 8 to 21. And really, in its genesis, we thought, they'll just be a support for us. They'll come to special events. But we've really found that a lot of our clients, both Abrigo and CASA clients, end up being youth ambassadors. And it's just a mix of youth from our community. And we do a lot of programming for them as well. So it comes social, emotional development. We've had everything from a wilderness first aid class to positive psychology to restorative justice. We've had a lot of programs in Espanola with our partners. And these youth are getting so much out of it. We're seeing them. Their self-esteem is just blossoming. We have some youth tell us they're going to have a life of service because they're so gratified by this. It's really changed how they see their future.
It sounds to me like it's very empowering, especially if it was a kid that was in the program and then they become the helper.
Absolutely, Inez. I think that gets to the heart of it. It's a beautiful way of describing that.
Yeah, I like hearing that because we all need to feel as though we're making a difference. Veronica, talk a little bit about some of the work you've done outside of New Mexico, because I met you because you were a candidate for state senate, and I also had read that you had been recognized for different parts of your life besides, what we're talking about today. And I think you really bring an interesting experience to what you're doing because you've got your successful job at the legislature, you've got your political acumen, and then you've got your broader world.
So right now, I call myself a national tribal and child welfare advocate because a lot of my child welfare advocacy is centered on making sure specifically tribal communities and families have what they need to keep their children in Native communities. So a lot of my work is on, nationally, it's on the Indian Child Welfare Act, and statewide, it's on the Indian Family Protection Act, which is our state version of that federal law. But mostly in all across the board, my work is really centered in making sure that people like myself with lived experience in the system are being centered on the policy side, on the organizational side. And I've always been a big advocate that the best people to tell you what does and doesn't work are going to be the people that have walked in these shoes before. So in any platform that I hold, it's always making sure that lived experience voices, not just mine, are a part of that. And so that kind of just sums that all up together. But
yeah. No, that's really important because you can have the best intent. Like I could go, I was a volunteer years ago with Catholic Charities for a young mother and her baby because the purpose of the program was to prevent a second pregnancy. Because the idea was that if you have one kid when you're a teenager, you can scrape by, your family can help you. But once you have 2 or 3, you get really, really broke, and it's very, very hard not to get into a cycle that's hard on your kids. And I was helpful, I hope, but I didn't know enough about those things because, when I was 15, I didn't have a baby. I was worried about, whether I was going to get an A on my test or something. So what you're bringing is, I think, the pain, not the pain, but just the shock of having to explain yourself over and over. I think grown-ups don't get what that does to kids or to the families when they have to repeat and repeat.
Yes, and I've really worked to make sure that all of my advocacy is coming from a very human place, and I think that that's really made the biggest difference in talks and trainings and presentations is I'm going to share my story with you, and I'm going to tell you where things, fell through the cracks and where things didn't. And I'm also going to tell you what you can take with you home, right? And those tangible steps that you can do to make that difference. And part of the reason why I've stayed so long with CASA First has been because how central Annie has made, my experience, those of other lived experience folks in the organization. And I think that's been a really big reason why we've grown, right? We had a conversation about why do kids only get help because they're in a system, and when they're in systems, why is it in silos, right? We had those conversations, and I think it kind of sparked that interest in taking some of those barriers out. And so I think that lived experience is always going to, help you put the right foot forward. And I always also say the Indian Child Welfare Act has been kind of labeled as this gold standard piece of legislation. But what people don't talk about is that the people that wrote that advocated for that, were, our grandmothers, our aunts, our uncles, those people with lived experience of having children removed. So that, in my world, will always be that golden standard as well.
And I think so many Americans don't understand what happened to Indian babies in the 50s and the 60s. And you have to kind of tell that story so that when someone has adopted a baby and then they take it all the way to the Supreme Court to basically gut the Indian Child Welfare Act, you have to understand what went before and why tribal nations have to be consulted and families have to be brought in. It's so important because otherwise, it's just decimates tribes, and it decimates the children because you've got a part of you missing. And that is understandable. Grace, how did you guys, and maybe Annie, when did you start expanding and kind of making the mission more than the court-appointed special advocates?
So it was a little bit over a year ago that we introduced Abrigo Advocates. I mean, I think informally we were finding that we were helping other kids and families. I'd have former foster kids call me and say, I need help, and we'd help them. And also, as Veronica said, from conversations we've had with lived experience leaders, saying, don't define us by the system. And I think because the landscape's changing and what we're seeing in our communities, and having conversations with our partners as well led that. But I think it's a natural evolution. It feels really natural to us, and I feel like we keep growing. We're creating a space in our office that's very soothing and calming for kids and families when they need a break, and how to build those social emotional skills in multiple areas. And we're consulting with other organizations who work with kids and how they can kind of look when kids and families struggle. I think we want to challenge all of ourselves to think of it differently, and not from a punitive way, but what are they communicating? What do they need? How to help them be more successful.
Yeah. It'd be interesting if you talk to some of the people in your program about why so many kids are missing school, because it's such a barrier to doing well educationally, but it keeps happening. And of course, you can't put people in jail because their kids miss school, or you shouldn't. But what can we do to encourage that? I kind of wish all the social groups and the schools would get together to do like a campaign, and whoever has the most kids there every day, the school gets a pizza party or something.
I mean, I love that question, Inez, but we have some ideas around that. And I think moving away from punitive as well, and making it a place that's welcoming. And I think if they talk to the children and families who weren't attending school and asking them what would make them feel more successful, and being reactive to that instead of asking kids and families who've struggled or had challenges to fit in a box, maybe we need to.
No. And I know my one of my real good friends is a middle school teacher, and she says usually, they're having to babysit the younger kid. I mean, things just happen in their lives. But again, they're happening more than we need them to happen in New Mexico, and we want to change that so that people all have the chance to have successful adult lives.
And it's one area where our advocates are quite involved. For some of the kids in foster care, they are the educational advocate. Or with other kids, they really make sure, like school consistency, not being moved from school to school, how to help them succeed. Some of our advocates will help even with tutoring or accessing that.
And if I may add, as an organization, we also do collaborate with schools. We go to resource fairs that are hosted at elementary schools and middle schools and high schools, and make sure that we develop relationships with school counselors and teachers and principals. And I think that that is also important so that educators know that they can rely on us as well. And if they are struggling with a child and figuring out how to motivate a kid, they can also reach out to us and make that referral. And I think just making sure that we keep that open line of communication is important.
Okay, so that people know more about the fact that you guys are out there and able to help, so that you can get referrals and get, new clients and that kind of thing. That's good. Anything else you want to add, Veronica? I just want to end it on a high note.
On a high note, no pressure, right?
No, not at all.
I think really, though, I'll just end on this. What I think makes CASA First have such the big impact that it has for a really kind of small, homey organization is that we've built kind of this family between the staff, the volunteers, the board. It's one of the most calming environments and teams I think I've ever been a part of, and I've been a part of a lot of teams. And I think it comes down to the people that are involved, but really just want to emphasize if there's any type of calling to learn more about this, get involved in this work, we will find a space for you. And that's how I think we've found some of our best members. It's just walking in the door and asking some questions. So I definitely welcome that for our team, and in the organization as a whole.
Oh, good. And on that note, this has been another Conversations Different. We'll be back next week.